Hello and welcome everybody to the March 2023 event for the Atlanta Kubernetes Meetup. So this is a special event for us, but I'll get started as we always do with a call for hiring in the community. If you or your company or your team or whatever it may be are hiring for folks in the kind of Kubernetes or cloud native software space, go ahead and post information about it in the chat. And after the news segment, I'll read all that out. Make sure you include contact information for a point of contact for somebody who might be interested. Where can they find the listing or who can they email? And I'll include all that information in the show notes too if you're watching this later. And now while we get those gathered up, I'll go ahead and hand over to Joe for the news segment.
All right, let me get my screen shared out here to the right thing. And let's go. All right, so as we usually do, we'll kick off with this month in Kubernetes. So a little light this month, and that's somewhat on purpose, that we didn't want to fill up too much time with hopefully what's going to be some great conversation with our special guests here later on. But we are currently in the Kubernetes version 1.27 release cycle. Everything within the current release cycle is frozen right now. So everything that should be in is already in. Getting ready to cut some releases and whatnot. Everything, the last dot and I's, cross and T's is due on April 4th. So we did have some fixed releases for Kubernetes 1.26, 1.25, and 1.24. These are patch releases, so they include a number of various things. No major feature updates, and I didn't see any notifications about major CVEs or anything of that nature. One thing to note out is that Kubernetes version 1.23 is now end of life from a community support perspective. 1.23.17 was the last patch release for that version. If you haven't already, you should probably be looking into getting upgraded to Kubernetes 1.24 or greater. Another thing to note, there's been a lot of commotion around implementing image signing of the official published Kubernetes images. There were some snafus in the patch releases for this month. And so you can't really enforce signing on all of the images right now. But the team is kind of evaluating what went wrong and some of the tooling and whatnot, and hopes to have everything in working order next month. So hopefully moving forward, we'll have a full, fully signed all of the official images published by the project. Again, here for promotions, deprecations, and CVEs, NA here does not mean that there were none, just means that there weren't any that we wanted to call out. Moving on to PRs of note. So add node log query. This is pretty cool. So I know as I've advanced in my career supporting Kubernetes platforms, that the more and more that my fleet grows, the less and less that I want to have to worry about the individual nodes, especially the lower level functions like logging into a node to get some logs or to triage problems and things like that. And there's been a lot of cool work with like kubectl debug node to allow you to access the host some host level resources and whatnot for troubleshooting and triaging things. This goes a step forward, and it is this is the KEP for it that's basically exposing system level logs for components like Cubelet, kubeproxy, kubeAPI server, and things of that nature through the Kubernetes API itself. On Linux systems, this is using journald under the covers. On Windows systems, this is using like Event Manager and some of the other things there that I'm way less familiar with. But essentially, there's no stable exposure of this through like kubectl yet, but there is work adding kind of alpha level features into the CLI there, where essentially you'll be able to do like, you know, kubectl node logs type thing and actually grab the logs, streaming logs from the nodes themselves from those components, which is very, very cool. So just continuing to add features that allow us to seamlessly interact in the same way that we do with a lot of the other features of the Kubernetes platform. So really cool stuff. Another interesting here was in-place pod vertical scaling. So this was one that kind of slipped by me in the past. but essentially what this does is it allows you to make changes to a running pod that doesn't necessarily result in a pod restarting or being rescheduled. So this could be something like resizing allocated resources to a pod. So you want to bump up the memory or CPU resources to a pod. This interface allows for coordination with the underlying container runtime and some of the other pieces under the hood in the Kubernetes platform to make those adjustments. And there are some interesting things where you can say, depending on your application, your workload that's running in the pod, if it does need to be like quiesce with a container restart, there are some features in the spec where you can specify that that needs to happen. There's also some differences between different container runtimes where that restart might happen automatically, regardless of whether you want it to or not. But some really interesting work there to add a little more flexibility to manipulation of running workloads on Kubernetes. Another thing here is introducing a CLI for ApplySet based pruning. So this is another one that I had read a couple things about in the past of this ApplySet concept. And as I've done work with some kind of higher level tools built on top of Kubernetes, things like Carvel and like the CAP controller, things like Flux CD and things of that nature, where you have this concept of a deployable unit that could be like a Kubernetes deployment, a service, a config map, a secret, multiple things that are really part of one atomic set of a deployment. And so there's an API being developed called ApplySet that basically adds a loose coupling of those type of resources together. And with this, there's been a -- prune flag with kubectl apply for a while now. It's been in alpha state since I think Kubernetes 1.5 or something early on like that. And it's never left alpha state. And that essentially says that I'm supplying a list, manifest of Kubernetes resources to apply. And if there's anything that's currently running in the cluster that's not in the configuration that I'm specifying now, remove it. So that's like if you had config map A and config map B before, and you're doing a new kubectl apply and you only have config map B, it will automatically delete config map A. This adds a kind of a more flexible API behind this and implementation of this, with the hopes that they'll be able to take this feature and move it beyond alpha down the road. And it brings along a whole suite of other capabilities as the KEP is pushed forward through. This is just one piece of the ApplySet concept, the pruning piece. There are others, and we have the link to the KEP here as well if you want to read through that and get some more details. Moving on to things of interest in the community. There's a good article here that I believe was on the official Kubernetes blog about Quack, or Kubernetes without Cubelet. So this is an interesting project that basically, for things around scalability, sometimes you want to be able to test either your CI/CD tooling, or maybe the development of a controller or Kubernetes operator, or some other tooling in your environment on a large set of nodes. Maybe you want to test the upper bounds of what happens at 100 nodes, or what happens at 1,000 nodes or 5,000 nodes. But obviously you don't necessarily want to spin up 1,000 nodes or 5,000 nodes just for some test thing. So this allows for a sort of simulation of Kubernetes nodes that are fully API compatible. They look, smell, like a Kubernetes node, but it's not actually spinning up the resources and everything in the traditional sense. And there's all sorts of use cases here, from learning to development to testing. I won't go into all the details there, but again, some pretty cool tooling that I think, I know I've thought about a bunch of different use cases for it, as well as some use cases within the community itself of maybe reducing some of the cloud spend for scalability testing, which is always a good thing. And then we have Service Weaver, which maybe we'll get to talk a little bit about later on, but this is a new project out of Google that The 10 says it's a framework for writing distributed applications. I dug in just a little bit on this. It seems like there's some partial overlap with some other tools in the ecosystem, but something that's a little different in my understanding of this is that you can basically write your application or service as a single monolith. And then through some configuration and some sort of like compile time magic, if you will, you can have things separated into disparate microservices, and communication between the microservices and things like that is orchestrated through some built-in magic and whatnot. So pretty interesting stuff there. Again, won't go into too much detail. Maybe there'll be some questions about that later on tonight. And then Steampipe. I never thought that I would be excited about looking at SQL again in my career, but this kind of turned that for me. So Steampipe is a project that essentially provides a SQL interface for tons of different services. And that can be your cloud provider services, say AWS or GCP. Could be things like Kubernetes. It could be things like other databases, all sorts of things in here. So they have this really cool plugin system. And I have a separate link here to the plugin system and just show you. So I'm not sure how long this project's been about, but there are a ton of plugins for different CI systems, different security systems, different cloud providers, GitHub, GitLab, Google Docs, all sorts of stuff. So essentially you have this plugin model and you can set things up. It handles authentication and things like that to the individual services. And then you can interact with it all like it's one big database, but there is no database. So, there's not a lot of infrastructure or anything like that you have to manage to make this happen. You're not replicating data from one service into a big centralized database or anything like that, but seems pretty cool. Hope to get some time to test that out down the line. And that is the end of our community news and this month in Kubernetes. So Alex, I'll hand it back over to you.
Awesome. I love the tagline on Steampipe there, query like it's 1992. Whoever came up with that one deserves some kudos. That's a great one. Okay, so looking at hiring, we had one person post an announcement. It looks like William Bierbauer for Shadowsoft posted a link for senior technical consultants that's in the Atlanta area as well as working remotely. Looks like they're working around some Kubernetes stuff. You can hit up William or check out the link he posted in chat. It'll also be in the show notes. I will also cheat and call out that Calendly is hiring for several roles around kind of Kubernetes and the infrastructure space for data reliability engineer, platform engineer, software engineers for our enablement team. All those roles are in the department that rolls up to me. So if you're curious about any of them, feel free to hit me up on the Kubernetes Slack or Twitter, Tech404, LinkedIn, Meetup, wherever you can get at me. I'm easy to find. Yeah, it looks like that is all we had posted for hiring announcements. So as always, we like to thank our sponsor that covers our webinar costs and meetup fees and all of those things. So thank you to Calendly for covering all of that for us. We're deeply appreciative of that. We can't do all this fun community stuff without people supporting it for us. So yeah, before we dive in, so this is going to be largely a Q&A setup. If you have a question that you'd like to pitch to Kelsey, use the Q&A feature built into Zoom. If you look at the bar down at the very bottom for Zoom controls, there's a little, couple speech bubbles with Q&A. Post your question in there, and Joe and I will curate those and bounce them off Kelsey as we work through. And then after we're done, as always, stick around for kind of the social segment of the meetup. We'll let everybody come off of mute and turn on your cameras and hang out a little bit and try to recapture the social part of the meetup experience. And with that, we can dive into what you're all actually here for.
All right. So tonight, a little bit different than usual since this nobody's going to be presenting at you today. Hopefully things are going to be a little bit more intimate in kind of a fireside chat format. So we have some questions prepared for Kelsey to get the ball rolling, but please, as Alex mentioned, use the Q&A feature to post your own questions, and we'll try to work those in as we go along. And now that we've got all that out of the way, it's a great honor to welcome Kelsey Hightower to the Kubernetes Atlanta meetup. Kelsey is a person that probably doesn't need an introduction, but for anyone that's kind of been living under a rock for a while, you know, if you read Wikipedia, Kelsey's a distinguished engineer at Google.
I'll do my introduction. I'm from Atlanta.
Okay, yeah, go ahead then.
I'm from the A. I was born in Thomasville, Georgia, way out in the country somewhere. At least that's what it says on my birth certificate. My mom backs it up, so I guess it's true. And I lived in Long Beach, California until I was about 15. Then we moved back to Atlanta, and I went to Lovejoy High School, where I did my first, Technology Student Association, TSA. And that's where I got exposed to building bridges, AutoCAD. I even went to Savannah and competed in AutoCAD and came in second place because I couldn't print out my work in time, but I still got that little ribbon. Don't know where it is, but I do remember doing that. So that was my first introduction to the tech game. And then going from there, in Jonesboro, opened a computer store. This is like 99, right? When there was CompUSA down the way. And on the north side, if you know anything about Atlanta, that's where Norcross, you can buy all the computer parts right there off of Jimmy Carter. And I was the guy that went to Jimmy Carter and brought it all back to the south side. So you can buy that $10 modem after the lightning thunderstorm blows your computer away and you can't get it back online. I already knew. There was rain the day before. I'm getting 5 or 10 customers walking through the store. I can't get online. Can you help? Yes, I will sell you another $10 Win 2K modem. And so from there is really where I started to kind of understand this idea of like running cables, crimping Cat5 cables, doing whatever it takes to get those network printers in place. And then I just did the loop, Cox Communications, Total Systems. Atlanta has just lots of technology companies or companies using technology in some way. And that's just where I cut my teeth. And the last thing I'll say here is going to my very first Python meetup in Georgia Tech before we moved it to a bar for Northside Drive downtown. That's really when I kind of immersed into that local Atlanta tech community where people are just trying to get their jobs done and they choose to better themselves by going to these meetups after work. So I appreciate all the people hanging out with us during that time because this is how we get better. And of course, you could have been doing something else.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kelsey. Lots of good insight there. But the main piece of that is Kelsey's a fellow ATLian, so you know.
100%.
Cool. Well, again, Kelsey, thank you for joining us today. And I'll kick off with the first question here. And from what I've read, you just gave us a little bit of kind of your career path, but there's some meat there of like you go from A+ certification to distinguished engineer at Google. Beyond just time in the seat, how do you think your career path shaped you for what your role is today?
Honestly, just taking control over it. You know what I mean? You know, when I got, you know, one of the first jobs out there opening that computer store was a small data center, actually a pretty large data center in Google terms. Right there in Sandy Springs, I believe it was. There's a Google data center out there in the industrial area. And so there I kind of learned system administration work at scale, right? There's so many servers, you're building all kind of automation tools. You're understanding like really how to provision bare metal at scale. And so with that system administrator background in the actual data center, then going to Pier 1, where I was doing mainly like tech support. You know, people used to have web hosting. You know, they would order those servers for like, I don't know, $50 a month, and it would be running Plesk, MySQL, and some random ass DNS thing, all written in PHP, by the way. And so back then is really where I kind of understood, like in the web business, you got to go fast. Everything is cheap. You got to get on and off that phone super quick. And then I learned how to actually write code because it turns out a lot of the issues you had, it was more about like, oh, I've messed up my MySQL database, or Plesk and my email is stuck in this weird state. And you just run some scripts, try to get things back into place. And so I got off the phone and just really started to hyper focus on, y'all just open the tickets. And a few of us would just speed through closing them out and keeping the ticket queue low. And then eventually I was able to interview for the engineering side of the house. So these are the people who would automate when you click that button on the form that said, I wanted a server with a RAID 5, well, we would pixie boot it. We would run all this Perl and Python to get the system to the right thing. And then when it came online, we would assign the server to you with this IP address. So there's a whole set of engineering teams behind that. When Pier 1 that got bought by, it was a spin out of Rackspace that merged. So Server Beach, that's the arm that I was doing engineering work for. And so you start to really just start to level up. You go from like doing sysadmin, tech support, to writing code to automate the provisioning of things. And then I had a contract job up Georgia 400 in Alpharetta. That's the first time that I seen my salary double between jobs. And you go in there, it's a much more corporate environment. Everybody's wearing slacks, jeans on Friday. But when you get into that kind of environment, coming from the one that I came from, in web hosting, you got to hustle, you got to be fast, you got to know your stuff. Corporate America, not so much. Corporate America is a little slower. You can fix the server in 3 or 4 days. You know, we about to order some new hardware. We'll get it online next month. I'm like, next month? We got to get that server online in like an hour. We don't got a month. And so I think for me, that kind of coming up in the trenches like that just made me like almost a cowboy in corporate America. It's like, yeah, Puppet just came out, 0248, ready for production. To me, that's a lot of numbers. And when you add them up, that's more than 1.0. So what are y'all afraid of? And I remember getting Puppet working. I'm like, why are we running bash scripts and corn shell and run books? Like, we got to make progress. And so at that point, I kind of knew that for the pace, I was never going to get it at the job. So that's when I started going to meetups. I needed an outlet to let me really kind of be around people who were just as ambitious as I was. But then I would kind of cycle it back into the work. So when the job was like, yo, you know, we can't use anything that doesn't come from Red Hat, I was like, ooh, please God, let there be an RPM for Puppet. Oh, there's an RPM for Puppet. That means we in, baby. It's an old version, but it's an RPM. So it aligns to corporate policy. I'm not installing any third-party software. And so I learned how to kind of get things to production no matter how it worked. And so then I started contributing to open source to start to fill in the gaps. I remember one of my biggest contributions back then, you guys remember Cobbler. It was this Pixie system built by, you know, Red Hat at that time that you can actually provision your server, Pixie boot it, and then you would run Kickstart over a network. So that way you can actually get, you know, lay down your image, get everything the way you want it. And that was cool. And then when it would come up, we would do some weird stuff to install Puppet. I was like, man, there's got to be a better way. And so I decided to add a new thing called configuration over a network. And so then you can take the metadata that you used to store in Cobbler, used to put in things like the MAC address, the IP that you want, maybe give it a name, but I extended that so you can put additional metadata that will give it a lightweight configuration management system. So get all your SSH keys set up, install additional packages, the whole nine. And that's when I was like, yo, you can change the software, not just buy it from the vendor. And so I was kind of hooked. And then those meetups prepared me for talking in public. So doing all of that work at TSYS, Total Systems, for about 2.5 years, James Turnbull, you know, the guy who used to write all the tech books back then, I remember my director saw him at an event. He said, hey, you should come visit us. And he was in his mind was like, we need the experts to come talk to our people. So when I was showing him how we automated Puppet behind Jira tickets and custom fields, James was like, yeah, what y'all is doing is on another level. This ain't standard. And they invited me to go out and speak at the Puppet Conf in 2012, the first one in Portland. I went there, I did this little keynote, or I gave this talk, and they interviewed me to be on the engineering side. So when I get back to Atlanta, I resigned. And then I took a job working remote for Puppet Labs. And I'll stop it there. But I think the moral of that story is I just took control of my career. If I saw something I wanted to do, even if it wasn't in the job description, I figured out how to get it done.
Cool. That's awesome, Kelsey. A lot of that is definitely relatable, I think, to myself, and then to a lot of my friends I see in the crowd here too. So thank you again.
Yeah, I like that message a lot. Kind of take control of your career. I think I like hearing that narrative of where people come from. The space we're in now is kind of a lot different from where we were, back then. I think I did a similar arc kind of coming up through the data centers and stuff. But kind of today, if you met a new engineer who's maybe straight out of school, or maybe not even straight out of school, maybe just kind of, has been playing around with Linux and wants to get into the space, wants to learn about, infrastructure and system software, and they happen to get your ear and ask what they should do to get to, kind of get into the industry, what would your advice to them be?
I mean, to be honest, at that stage, any job is going to be fine. You know what I mean? I don't care if it's PHP or Geek Squad at Best Buy. Just get in anywhere. And then I think once you get in, now you got a foundation in which to do your search. Because, a lot of people don't really calculate a career. Everyone's kind of focused on the right now. But if you think about the career, let's say you go to Geek Squad, whatever you got to wear, do what you got to do. Then once you're there, all right, let's learn your customer service skills, understand what it means to give an estimate, go get A+ certified, go get certified on all the stuff that they're supposed to get certified on to fix, because all this going to make sense at some point later on in your career. And then if I'm at a place like that, now I'm plotting, okay, there's a little bit of networking, even just setting up Wi-Fi modems and simple routers for people. There's a little bit of break fix kind of stuff and troubleshooting. I'm going to figure out what part of the game I'm interested in the most. And then I'm just going to bet on something. So if you like networking, maybe go get that CCNA certification and try to get some skills there. And then just try to see yourself doing that next role. And then I would probably say, kind of broadcast to the world what you're working on. Say, hey, today I'm at Geek Squad, but tomorrow I think I want to be a network administrator. Here's the skills that I have. Here's the certifications that I'm working on. And here's some of the meetups I attend where I'm talking about my career journey and learning about stuff like IPv6 and all these other things. And if you're broadcasting, then the people you meet along the way kind of know what they can do to kind of help you along on your journey. So start somewhere, don't matter where, and then just build on top of it.
Yeah, I think that echoes a lot with me. The ability to broadcast, what you're working on or what you're interested in out into the world is very different these days. Which double-edged sword sometimes, but I think one thing I found within the Kubernetes community specifically is it's been very welcoming. And regardless of whether you've got 20 years in the seat and you're just starting on something new, or, this is your first job right out of college, the ability to do things like that and say, hey, I'm stuck on this, where should I go? What should I look at? Or, hey, I'm new, what should I be looking at? Those types of things. And I think that's one of the things that keeps me involved in doing things like the meetup and whatnot is just seeing the community come and help everybody else. And, just the perpetual bar raiser, for everybody. So, yeah.
And I think the reason this is the case is because, Kubernetes has pretty humble origins. At the time, Docker was just king of the castle, right? And then you had Mesos on the kind of enterprise side. And so this newcomer Kubernetes was just trying to find its way, right? It's like, can we even compete with the likes of Docker Swarm? Do even people think we're onto something here? And so I think they had to be super welcome. Number one, you're competing with these existing very vibrant communities. So you had to be welcoming because people already had a place to be. People already had a place to go. So I think being welcome, trying to attract talent from any part of the ecosystem, and then giving people a surface, like the API surface of Kubernetes just promotes people coming up with their own ideas and then hooking them in and then turning it into a new CRD or kubectl plugin or a mission controller. So I think just having that pluggable surface kind of reminds me of when Terraform came out. It felt like it was real easy to create your own Terraform integrations. So people did.
So a little bit of a softball question here, but this is one that I've personally been dying to ask for a while. So at 56,000 stars, 3,900 open issues, and 462 open pull requests, your no-code project is one of the most popular projects on GitHub. Do you ever read the pull requests or the issues?
Not really. I don't go there very often, but every once in a while, I'll get a question about this during like a keynote, like large event, 5,000, 10,000 people in the audience, and I'll just pull it up right there. And I just do this demo, right? There's this demo that I do. You know what? We'll do it now, right? So let's do NoCode GitHub. So we'll do a live demo right now to show you how I tend to talk about it. And the last couple of times that I've done it, I'm assuming I can share my screen. I'm going to share my screen. So here we go. So typically the way it goes is like, listen, like this no code thing, and I have this repository, and I explain to people what no code is. It's like, look, people have been writing software, but I think the best way to do it is no code, right? If you want reliable, easy to deploy, and then you start by doing this. And the crowd sees the blank thing, and it's like, they finally get it. It's like, this is just an example, but we finna go beyond the hello world. And I was like, but now you got to deploy it. We know how hard containers can be. We know how hard Kubernetes can be. Here you go. You see what I'm saying? How easy this is? And if you want to make sure it's working, you got to see this. And so then I talk about community is important. And so if you want to contribute, there's only one rule. You don't. You don't contribute. And every once in a while, I'll pop into some of these issues, and they be wild, right? Like some people be doing stuff like finding the syntax error. But the thing that's most hilarious about it is that the community be in there, like helping them solve the problem. Like, hey, I found this issue with this code block. When it says this, let's just say that. It's a slight issue, but when you run it on platforms such as Mac OS or Replit, you can crash the program. And then this dude is like, yo, I found the file. It's in here. Follows the instructions, change this to this, to this to that, and now it runs. And there's like, it's like people are literally doing this. So when this repository first came out, it was wild because I was in the airport. And I was like, I had just did this big engineering deep dive. And it's funny, when I used to work at that company, Total Systems in Alpharetta, there's this dude we hired. If you just start talking about anything code related, he just started typing. I said, dude, why are you typing? He's like, I thought I heard a feature. And I was like, no. We don't need no code right now. We need to listen and understand the problem. And so I was in some engineering summit where people talking about building stuff. I was like, guys, we don't need no more. And I was going to tweet, but I decided, you know what, a tweet would be too simple. I'm just going to make a new framework to help engineers understand a better way of thinking about this problem. And so I just tweeted it and I got on the flight. And then I looked at it. I had people DMing me like, yo, man, I'm an engineering manager. I need you to take this down because my whole team is playing around too much in comments, posting stuff in Slack. It's killing productivity. And so I looked at it and it was just off the chain with stars, people writing blog posts. Someone really said, yo, we just discovered no code, and just looking at the repository made everything better. So it's a running joke. I keep it up, but that's the origin behind it. And the moral of the story is a lot of times they ain't got to write any code. We just got to figure out, is there an existing solution to our problem? And let's avoid writing code if we don't have to.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have an anecdote from my career that I've told often, but a perfect example going into this is an unnamed credit card transaction processing company here, but they had the existing transaction processing system that ran on mainframes, and it was 30-something-year-old COBOL code, and there was a little group of people over here that were the people that managed that. Nobody touched it, just keep it running type thing. And CTO comes in and says, we're going to do this big multi-year project, and we're going to migrate from mainframes and COBOL to open systems and C++, and locked a bunch of software engineers in a room for months, like 6-7 months, right? And they came out, he said, okay, we got it running. It looks a little bit different though. Before, we stored 14 fields for every transaction. Now we store 412 fields per every transaction. We get it out into production and get the first customers to kind of start beta testing it. And the customers came back unanimously and said, we don't want this. It's too complicated. There's too many options. Can we have the 12 options back, please? So,
And it's so funny. I went through exactly that same thing. Instead of C++, it was Java.
Nice. I don't know that I can follow up the no code question. That's a tough demo to follow, man. It's revolutionary stuff. So I guess I'll go back to more of the personal questions. So I'm kind of curious to hear from you, Kelsey. Like, you're one of the highest profile people in this kind of cloud native software space. I mean, I think if anybody knows anything about the cloud native space, and knows anyone here, it'd probably be your name. Where do you go from there? Like you've kind of hit this high point that most people can't even really dream about. But like, what are your goals from this point in your career? Like, what are you striving for? What are you looking forward to?
I'm so glad that I became a minimalist before all of this, because the thing is, all of us got egos, and if you can't handle it, you could become a prima donna and start having meltdowns on social media. You could start acting like a celebrity at a conference where you don't want to talk to anybody and just sit in the green room until it's your time to go up. And that would be tragic. So for me, I kind of hit my goals before this, right? All I wanted to do was make it in this game, earn enough money, pay off all your stuff and, get the things that you want or get the things that you need and do a little bit of what you want, right? That was kind of the goal. And so I got that. And once I got that, then the freedom came to just express myself however I want it. And so what that means is I can take risk. I can do things like contribute to open source in my free time, swap jobs without, figuring out, is this going to hurt my resume or not? Taking on things like Kubernetes and rolling up my sleeves and just getting the work in, picking projects that I like, not necessarily the ones that were guaranteed to get me a job. And so for me, if you keep doing that, I think what happens is the success keeps coming because you ain't got to pretend. You could just be yourself. So where I am now is, I would say for the last 10 years, the people who've gotten to know me said, we'll accept you as you are, right? The way you go about things, the way you put your opinion on top of things, we like that. Just keep it coming. So from here on out, though, I kind of feel like I'm at that part of my career. We all watch sports. You know how there's this season, this is the last season for that athlete. That's it. It ain't about the championship. They not trading players to make the team better. When they're in the locker room, there's like, you understand, this is Kobe Bryant last season. We don't care what the record is at the end of the season. There's going to be some jersey swaps. There's going to be, if you want to take 80 shots tonight, he's going to take 80 shots tonight. And so I think you kind of feel like you get to that stage, but then I think the thing behind closed doors, though, is the mentorship. You're trying to share your formula with as many people as possible. You're trying to be very transparent in like how you did your thing, not so that people can copy, just so that people can be comfortable holding up the mirror, seeing what they see and getting comfortable with their own version of themselves. And so I think the next stage for me is to get a lot more people to make their own name for themselves and give us a unique flavor that we haven't seen before. And so maybe we don't get another Kelsey, maybe we get another person that brings their own unique take to the space. So that's it for me. I'm happy where I am, but with this attitude, I feel like I can do anything. So what's next is whatever happens.
I love that, man. Yeah, and that's awesome. Getting to the top and using it to help other people out, right? That's what it's about. That's great, man. We do, before we ask the next one of our questions, we have one of our attendees asked a question in the Q&A feature. Pavel says, I remember Kelsey said some time ago, you shouldn't install Kubernetes yourself unless you're in the business of running Kubernetes. So Kelsey, what's your opinion these days about the kind of build versus buy debate, and what's your criteria for deciding that?
You know what? We do this all throughout our lives. Every day, this is what you do, right? Like you got utility coming to your house. You ain't thinking about, I mean, some people are getting solar panels and batteries on the wall. Until the winter come, you realize you can't store enough electricity to get you through 4 or 5 days. You can get you a good 1 day in there. So you realize you still depend on the grid like everybody else for the most part. Same thing is true of airports, streaming television. We outsource a lot of things to society, and it works because society tends to be able to do things at a bigger scale than we can do. But when it comes to software, boy, we get delusional real quick. We'd be like, man, I can rebuild Twitter in like this weekend. You're like, no, you can't. You literally, you could do a prototype this weekend, but you're not rebuilding Twitter this weekend. So I think it's just this thing of we build what we have to, right? If you've ever used the cloud, there's some stuff that's kind of ready to go out of the box. You know how it is. It does like 95% of what it's supposed to do. And the 5% is why we have a job. So my philosophy on it is that 5% keeps moving. And if you're any good, you just keep understanding when you need to move on. So in the early days, before there was any managed services for Kube, the only option you could do was run it yourself. It made sense. And everybody was out making Kubernetes install scripts, kubeadmin. There's a ton of those things. But then when platforms like GKE get real good, you got to stop me. Hey, I know you wrote 200,000 line bash script. It worked. Nope, it worked. But we kind of done with it. And we didn't tell you. But for the last 6 months, we just been clicking the GKE button. We ain't even been using the bash script. And when that engineer finds out, I was like, so y'all not using the script? Nah, man, we just been running it and piping the output to dev. No, man, we ain't really been using it. We just did that for the bash history. Right. And it's like this thing you got to let go. So my philosophy on buy versus build is buy what you can and then build what you have to. That's it. And it's just a sliding scale.
Yeah, I bet there's a big bash script somewhere in like GKE somewhere. There's got to be. So, you know, it lives on in prosperity in that
It's
way.
some bash. All these people be acting like, nah, we dealing with higher levels of abstraction. Bash pipe into another tool. That's what you're doing.
Cool. So kind of along the same lines, for me, Kubernetes The Hard Way was my first real learning resource as I got involved in Kubernetes. And at the time, it was pretty much considered the de facto getting started guide for Kubernetes. Has your viewpoint on that project changed over the years?
No, I think for people that are new, I mean, just the way I learned, I need to know how all the parts fit together. I just need a little space for that. You know what I mean? So I think it's so important for people we expect to manage this stuff. Even if you use a managed service later, that's fine. But if you're like me, you just kind of want to know, what do these binaries do? What do the config files even look like? What's the security model in between? And once you do that, if anything, you walk away with just a little bit of confidence to say, okay, I think I understand what the moving parts are. So then when you go read the blog posts and the books, it starts to make a lot more sense because now we're all on the same page about what we're talking about. So I do think that's a part of the discussion for a lot of people. But then as you progress, you don't need that anymore. But I do think it's a resource that's worth having. So that's my opinions on it.
Yeah, I really feel like that should be the piece of advice for a new engineer, right? Go do Kubernetes the hard way one time, then come back and talk to you about everything.
Or
else.
figure out why you don't need Kubernetes.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. So, you know, I think there's a lot in that world of like, there's a lot of discussion to be had when you say a statement like that. Because what are you talking about? What exists? What can we learn from this new thing that would make somebody want to say that? Because to me, that's where you start to get creative. And I've done that plenty of times where the industry says do a thing. I'm like, well, what are people doing that aren't doing that? I want to get those answers too, because sometimes that would add insight into where this thing falls short or why people haven't made that transition yet. So that's also healthy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of us probably got started with Kubernetes the hard way, kind of way back in those early days. I'm curious though, like thinking back on those early days, like where we are now as like an ecosystem and the kind of cloud native being so prolific, it's a lot different than it was back then. And I'm kind of curious if you look back kind of in those early days, how's where we are now maybe different than what you expected? You know, if you were looking forward, kind of where you thought we were going versus where we arrived.
I mean, look, I think earlier days, I said Kubernetes will be around for 20 years. And so when you say something's going to be around for 20 years, that means you've seen something before that's been around for 20 years. And so what does it look like, right? A lot of hype, stability, then it gets boring. And then when it starts to get a little boring, that means it's mature. Then people can start building their careers on stable foundation, right? And then you start to get people who are really coming in to contribute, because it's easier to contribute when something isn't moving so fast. And so I think it's right where it's supposed to be. And we're only halfway. So that means there's 10 more years of people still kind of learning and building with this. But we all know it's got to happen. It's got to go away at some point. My question is, who's working on the thing that makes it go away? Right? Where's the Linus Torvalds that was hacking away during the big days of Solaris and AIX? There's a person right now trying to figure out what the next iteration of this thing is. And so we know that that stage has been set, because that's what the future usually becomes. You take the problems of today, you try to solve them, and a new thing will emerge. So we know someone somewhere is doing that.
One thing that's I'm always curious about when I come across either people that are new in the industry because they have a really fresh perspective, or people that are well seasoned, that are highly respected in the industry because, again, it's a slightly different perspective. But with everything going on in the technology world today, what are some things recently that have made you just kind of step back and go, wow?
No, seriously, I'm still surprised that how many people try to capitalize off of the lack of clarity and ride the hype wave. See, when people don't understand how something works, you can tell them anything and they believe it. And you got two choices. You could be the educator. So if you go to a magic show and the magician does this trick, and you're like, I know exactly how that works. All you did was blah, blah, blah. The audience is like, yeah, man, there ain't no real magic. That's a trick. And so the magician don't like that. Hey, you messing up the show, right? People need this illusion. I'm surprised at how many people just want to watch the illusion. They know it isn't real, but they like the entertainment. So they go along with it and they use all the buzzwords. Platform engineering, general AI will replace all the, that's not happening right now. We might be making progress, but that's not what we're doing. These things are to serve human beings. So I'm still surprised by things that just start with hype versus clarity, right? Service mesh, nope. Configurable proxy. That's a configurable proxy. We're not changing much in terms of how networking and HTTP and common protocols work. So that's still the thing that makes me go, wow, every time I see a new thing and it's like this hype and I go look at it and look behind me, I'm like, man, this is not worthy of a national conversation, not at least with this illusion. So that's the biggest thing that makes me go, wow, now, is that we still have to do all this work to decompose and bring reason to the hype.
I like that answer. It's a good one, man. So don't believe the hype, folks. You heard it here.
There's a whole song about it.
Yeah. So speaking of that, like, staying abreast of what's going on and kind of sorting out all the bullshit from the actual, useful information. Like, what do you do to keep up to date on what's going on and what's real in tech? And maybe that's a little different because of where you sit. Like, what do you do? And maybe what would you recommend other people do to kind of stay up to date and stay informed about what's actually going on?
We all know about that phrase, history repeats itself. But the only people who know that are the historians, right? So let's take WASM, for example, right? WASM is getting a lot of buzz. If you don't know what WASM is, you probably just confused. Some people say the future of cloud is WASM, right? What we're going to do in the future is we're going to write snippets of code, WebAssembly, and we're going to target this new runtime, and it's going to change everything. And you'd be like, damn, I need to pivot everything to this WASM thing. And then you go to the website, so you're like, damn, it look futuristic. Look at the graphics, right? Like, it's cool. All people are talking about it. And if you're a historian, you say, well, where does WASM come from? So then you rewind the clock. We got the web browser. If you open one web page, it can do stuff to another web page. That's dangerous. You type in your credit card in this other tab, is stealing your credit card information through JavaScript? We got to put a sandbox between these two things, a very tight one, right? So we limit what that thing can do, just operate in this really tight closed loop. It's cool. And then one day, companies like Adobe is like, you know what? What if we ran Photoshop in the browser? Or if we ran a video game at native speed? We can't just do that with current web technologies. And Flash didn't work out. Sorry, Macromedia and people who thought that was going to be the future. It turns out it wasn't. And so companies like that wanted to use native code. So we had to formalize that runtime a little bit, not just JavaScript, but give it its own, in many ways, like a new computer that you could target with limited capabilities. That's where it came from, and it succeeded. So as a web browser thing to allow people to run native code with tight restrictions, it works. Someone gets the vision that we should move this beyond the browser. All right, then you have companies like Cloudflare doing their thing with Cloudflare workers. Again, if you don't understand the history, your mind is blown. But if you remember Lua and Nginx, this feels very familiar. And so you're not mystified. You're just like, oh, we're going to have a different language or support multiple languages targeting that sandbox. Okay, now let's get to the server side. Y'all know how server-side applications work. We processing files. We using custom instruction sets like AVX 512 from Intel. It's messy. And I got code that's been running for 20 years. Some of that stuff needs raw UDP sockets. Some of it's doing multicast. That's the app I have. So when you take that app, and you put it on WASM, they say, yo, we don't support sockets. You don't support sockets in 2023? What am I gonna do with that? We don't do threads either. Hey, what? You don't do threads? So what type of apps am I gonna be able to build? And so then you start to really understand what this thing is and why the limitations exist, because where it came from. Now we're clear about where, I think they're clear where they want to go, but we know it's going to be a lot of work to get there. And then in the meanwhile, something may preempt it. So to me, that's what I mean by just like understanding the history, having context, and understanding all these things. So then you can actually evaluate. So to me, it's not hard to keep up anymore. So my advice is whatever you're working on, if you had a company doing PHP, learn everything about PHP, how it's optimized, how it's built, the system calls it makes, the syntax, because I promise you, when you move on to the next thing, you're going to be able to reuse 70% of what you learned, even in that stack. So that's what I would recommend.
All right, I think we rolled one of the Q&A from the attendees into that question. Reviewing the Q&A stuff right here. So one question from Buddha in the Q&A is, did you ever suffer from imposter syndrome? How did you overcome it, if you did?
Yeah, like I told you, that first job, when I got into tech, after that A+ certification, just looking at those job descriptions, right? They want 10 years of experience in everything. Even for someone new in the game, it's like junior system administrator with 40 years of AIX experience. You're like, what? That's junior? And so I was like, you know what? I can't apply for these jobs. That's why I thought it was easier just to open a small computer shop and just be my own boss, because if I look at my own resume, I'm gonna be like hired. And so I overcame it by just saying, nah, let me just do my own thing, build up my skills. And then eventually I just thought I had enough skills where I just built up the courage to apply for one of those jobs. But when I think about imposter syndrome these days, it kind of highlights how terrible people are in terms of like building other people up. If you get a new person without the same skills on the team, you could be an asshole and be like, go look it up. Or maybe you don't really have good coaching skills yourself. And so what happens is anyone that joins a team that is made up of people primarily like that, it's a terrible experience. And they make you feel like you shouldn't even ask any questions and you should just figure everything out by yourselves. Why? Because sometimes, I don't even know why they're even labeled senior engineers, but they be sitting in the corner trying to figure everything out by themselves, wasting time instead of communicating and asking to see if they can get any help. So you think that's the right behavior. So if you don't behave like that, you think you're pretending. And so for me, I just say, let me just stop pretending. You see me do this today. I'll say, I'm new to this thing. I'm trying it. Here's what I think about it. And you're free to tell me where I'm wrong, because I'm telling you I'm new. And so either you can be helpful or you don't. And so I think that imposter syndrome really is an element of the environment that you're in as you're learning, where people make you feel like you got to pretend. And if you get on a good team, they say, hey, man, you ain't got to pretend. We know you new. You can ask questions, but we would like you to kind of work through problems this way, but we're here to support you. And then I think that imposter syndrome tends to go away. So for me these days, people give me respect by default. And so now I don't feel like I got to pretend. So that's the way I thought about it. And I think overcoming is like, listen, some people just aren't really good at helping other people.
Yeah, I think that's it took me a while personally to get to a place to where I had that skill set. And a lot of that was being in, kind of coming of age in environments, just as you talked about, where people protected information as if, the information was their job security, right? And it's like, if I give that away, then my job's not secure anymore. And so it wasn't until I kind of, moved up to Atlanta, honestly, and got to work in a team where I had some exposure to kind of different personality types in the field, and had a good mentor that not only helped mentor me within my field, at the time as like a systems engineer, doing Unix stuff and whatnot, but also like just probably indirectly and not meaning to, like, started dropping those little nuggets of how to be a mentor in the field. And many years later, before I felt I was at a level where I could actually play that role for somebody, but that has been a super rewarding experience at different times in my career when I've been able to do that.
100%.
Yeah. So kind of getting into a little bit more around like community and stuff, whatnot. At KubeCon North America in 2020, you gave a really touching keynote. I think it was entitled Reflections. And one of the last comments you made in that keynote was, it's not a race if we're all on the same team. How do you view the marathon of the Kubernetes project and ecosystem today versus then?
I mean, I think it's the same, but there's so much but politics involved. You got some companies that have been built around the technology. People are championing or positioning themselves to try to be number one in the storage space or number one in the security space. And so I think that competitive nature for those that didn't come up in the community, maybe they didn't even have exposure on the communities or the contribution side, where they realize that there's people from all over, different companies, different backgrounds, all working towards the same goal. There are some people who never seen that side of Kubernetes. All they've seen is just like this race, right? If we can just get our product to be working on Kubernetes, then we can reap the benefits. So for them, it's just kind of this competition. And so I still think it's the same, because if you think about it, the more people that use Kubernetes, the bigger your potential market is getting. Ideally, this becomes like people switch between different teams all the time. So you're going to end up working with some of the people you're competing with today. So you should probably treat them in a way that whenever that happens, you guys can be on good terms and good standing. I think we just got to remind ourselves is that Kubernetes is just a tool, and it supports our culture. The culture of people that want to collaborate and build and extend and take our tools and make them work for us. That's the beautiful part of Kubernetes. So I think when we run into those people that are unaware of the true nature of our community, we just got to remind them, hey, this is what we're really doing. I get it. You're excited, or your marketing team gave you a quote and you got to hit it. We get it. But this is how you behave on this side of the fence, right? So if you're going to wear the Kubernetes logo, then make sure you represent what this community is supposed to be about. So look, it's a very profitable thing. If you got Kubernetes skills, you can go out and get a job based on those skills. I mean, it's dope. This thing is legit now. So I get it. We just got to remember where the origins are, though.
Yeah, that reminds me, a good friend of mine, Duffy Cooley, he always has a phrase he says of, same team, different companies, and that's, it really does ring true. I've had so many people I've met through my Kubernetes journey that, you can lean on when you need it, and they do the same back in return. And You know, it's just everybody versus some other open source projects I've been involved with in the past. You know, everybody really is interested in you know, just pushing people forward and up. So
yeah, that resonates even just with this meetup. I mean, I've been doing this meetup for almost 5 years, and Joe and I have been doing it together for about 4. And we have people coming to us all the time, like, hey, can we pay you money to, you know, sell something to people on your meetup or to advertise something? I mean, you wouldn't, I mean, I'm sure you actually would believe, Kelsey, but like most people wouldn't believe how many of those kind of offers we get. And we just tell people that's not what we're doing here. Like, that's not why we do that. That's not what this is for. This is about our community and us just hanging out with other people that care about the things we do. And we're not making money on it. You know, it costs us money, but that's not the point, you know, like we're here to do it because that's what we care about, you know.
That's dope.
Yeah, for sure, man. But so I guess talking about Kubernetes specifically a little bit, I guess we should have circled around to that at some point after all this talking. I'm kind of curious.
There's a good question in there about Service Weaver from Steve.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll don't you worry.
Okay.
Let me ask you this one, and then we'll move on. We got a couple of good ones queued up there. I'm curious with Kubernetes specifically. What's the number one kind of trap you see companies stepping into, or the thing they get wrong most when implementing Kubernetes? I mean, you must see a lot of implementations all over the place. You know, what's the trap you'd call out for people to avoid?
I mean, I remember a tweet that gets quoted a lot that I made a long time ago. It's like, Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms. It's not the end game. It's a starting point. And so, but I get why people make this mistake. If you got a bunch of servers and runbooks and scripts, and you like, yo, this is what we got. People open the Jira ticket, you parse the Jira ticket, you run your scripts, you look at the spreadsheet, make sure you're on the right server, make sure your SSH key is up to date. That's your world, right? VMware came out, you was like, nah, we don't need no virtualization. We good. We got these scripts. You see this version of Bash running? You good. So you ignored all of that. Puppet, Chef, Ansible, not me, baby. Nothing replacing Corn Shell. Okay. So some time go by, and you see all these people doing something amazing with Kubernetes. This is like getting in a time machine, 20 years into the future. So let's just say you install Kubernetes for the first time, and someone says, hey, I got this app. You can run one command, and it's going to find the right machine. Where's the spreadsheet? There ain't no spreadsheet. No spreadsheet? How you managing the service with no spreadsheet? That's like Kubernetes just registers all the machines automatically, and it has a built-in thing. So then how do you know what server to put it on? It's this thing called a scheduler, man. You just tell it what you want, and it finds the right machine. Well, what if the machine dies? It just moved the workload. They like, damn, what is this? This is the end game, because they've never seen this far before. So when they see Kubernetes, it's like, yo, we got to roll Kubernetes out everywhere. They write that Word document or SharePoint entry, install kubectl. We're going to email you your kube config. You emailing people kube config? Yeah, we attaching it. It's less than 10 megs. It's fine. It's like, I don't think we should be emailing kube configs. Hey, we got to distribute these things out. So you sending out kube configs. People got kubectl, and you send back like, yo, we ain't got to log into servers no more. We finally got some centralized logging. We got all of this stuff we never had before. So for that person, this is like a huge jump in the future. And then they meet somebody like me, and I say, yo, you giving people kubectl? They're like, what's wrong with that? I said, dude, that's like giving people direct SSH access to the server. And they'd be like, how so? I said, did you know what you can do with kubectl? You can do a lot with kubectl at scale. And so then it comes to them like, yo, okay, this is a net improvement, but it's still not the end game. I still need CI/CD. I still need change management. There's a layer that goes on above it. And so the way I like to explain to them is like, Kubernetes is the sugar, it's not the cake. It's a really cool ingredient. It kind of makes little things better. So I encourage those people to look at what they're currently doing in terms of a roadmap. We currently have these features and capabilities. We don't have these. So then it's like, well, there's multiple ways to get some of those. Kubernetes may check off a lot of boxes. but it don't check off all the boxes, but you got to know what the boxes are to even make that kind of decision. So that's kind of like the biggest mistake I see, where people like, we're going to do this modernization journey and we're going to adopt Kubernetes. I'm like, what that got to do with modernization? I get what Kubernetes brings to the table, but hopefully that isn't your whole strategy. And then I circle back 3 years later. It's like, man, you were kind of right about that Kubernetes thing, bro. We got 48 clusters. We got how many versions? We got 7 versions of Prometheus installed. We don't know why we have that many versions of Prometheus, but we can't remove them. And it's like, we just create a bigger mess. I said, I know, because you thought Kubernetes was the end game. So that's usually my big advice to people that are getting into this space for the first time.
Nice. All right, Kelsey, get ready, man. I got a big question for you. All
Okay.
Right, this might be a curveball, so get ready. All right, Steve Sue asked, can you talk about Service Weaver? For a while, it sounded like you were saying embracing the monolith after many folks ended up with distributed monoliths. Is this another smart pipe, dumb components approach, or what are the trade-offs to the approaches?
Yeah, look, I mean, honestly, if you think about software in general, data comes in, we process the data, and we decide to return a response, and maybe we store the state somewhere like a database. About 30, 40 plus years, that's how it works, even in 2023. And so the biggest challenge of doing that is we get lots of business requirements, and the functions and algorithms are pretty complex. And so we got all these design patterns and programming languages that have their own opinion about creating encapsulation between these components. If y'all have ever worked in a Java shop, you've seen how bad this can get. People have the base class. It's like, dude, we got a file. It comes in over SFTP. It lands. Read the file, process the rows, and put it in the database and be finished. Like, no, you cannot do that. You got to have a file enterprise base access class that is inherited. It's like, dude, just open the file. Please just open the file. I could do this with sed and awk, like cat file, parse each row, summarize them, and put it like, what are we doing all this? It's like, dude, we're real programmers. I said, okay, whatever. And then you look at the code base over time, there's 7,000 classes. The class path has 5 versions of the Postgres driver, 2 versions of the Oracle one, different parts of the code, and then becomes spaghetti code because people got to fix that bug fixed by Friday. People want an extended thing, but they don't know this code base very well. So they start hacking in weird spots and they just push it. And then over time, it's this ball of spaghetti. He's like, dude, this code is so bad. I want to declare bankruptcy. How you do it? Microservices. So you're like, yo, what are you going to do with the microservice? It's like, well, we're going to split the code base up. So let me get this right. Y'all can't manage one code base. And you want to have 2,000 code bases. Like, yeah, but we're not going to mess it up this time. We promise. So then they split up the monolith. And you look at it, it's like, hey, we used to run 200 servers over capacity, sometimes 3. Now we run 17,000 servers, and 90% of my cloud bill is literally serializing JSON and MTLS connections. It's like, yeah, I know we're doing microservices. Look at the graph. Look at all the metrics. He's like, man, this is stupid as hell. The site went from like 1 second round trip everything to like 12 hours just to get a connection back from the database. This not better, but look how clean the code is. He's like, dude, this is a distributed monolith. Ain't nothing changed except for instead of calling the class, you calling HTTP. This ain't clean. This is terrible. And then you're going to quit. And the next guy is going to make these little monoliths. So what is Service Weaver trying to do? Service Weaver is saying, listen, you need to write modular code, monolith or microservice. It just doesn't matter. You should be writing modular code. And what modular code looks like in the Service Weaver case is that instead of leaning on things like object-oriented programming and hoping that people do the right thing in terms of style guides and code reviews, we're just going to create tight, hard boundaries between the modules. So that means if you write one module to let users log in, and you have another module to let them buy stuff, those are going to be very explicit modules in the Service Weaver construct. And then if you want to call one of those modules, you actually have to implement a service that's in a client that calls it. You don't get to touch the class directly. You don't get to necessarily import the module directly. You got to call the client. So when deployed as a monolith, everything just kind of works as you think it would, right? Very fast access. Maybe there's some implementation detail, and the service weaver generates all the code so that the communication can occur. Now, let's just say you do have a legit reason why you want to split off the user profile thing so you can kind of scale it independently. Maybe you want to limit access to some security keys or something like that. In a config file, you say, hey, service weaver, I'm not changing my code. I want you to take the profile service. I want you to create a separate binary. And when we go to deploy, I want you to deploy everything and then wire it back up without me changing the code base. So Service Weaver is aware of the programming, the module boundaries, and you can decide at deploy time how things should be split up, monolith or microservices. So that's what Service Weaver about. So some people will probably never not deploy a monolith. You can go real far with that. Like GitHub was a monolith for a long time. Most of us don't have GitHub level traffic. Some people may want to create independent deployables. So that's what Service Weaver is all about, is making sure that you have a framework for writing modular code. And then the rest of the stuff can be code aware and then handle deployments for you.
That's cool. So we're rounding out time here. I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions. We'll do one from kind of our prepared list and one from the Q&A. Cool. So as Kubernetes is basically approaching, a decade of time out in the wild, do you have a message for the community, whether that be, the people consuming Kubernetes, the people building products on Kubernetes, the people, contributing upstream to Kubernetes?
Honestly, it's a big thank you. That's pretty much it. There's so many people now that are cutting releases, drafting release notes, reviewing those Kubernetes proposals. I mean, those little nuanced features, like some of the ones you just kind of highlighted, like being able to get the system logs from the Kubernetes API versus having to do all this weird out-of-band daemon set stuff to collect it. Those are little game-changing features that you only really get from people using it in production, figuring out where the gaps are. And nobody even know those people's names for the most part. You know what I mean? We don't really think about those folks. And in many cases, there's like one or two people working on that stuff from end to end. And if you've ever contributed to the Kubernetes project, it takes a long time to get consensus. You ain't just opening the issue no more, writing the code and get Brendan Burns to review it. That's over with. Now it's like, I got a lot of opinions about this 2-line documentation change. He's like, dude, it's literally 2 lines. It's like, yeah, but I'm trying to get my contributions up too. It's like, damn. And so I think now you have to cut through a lot to make a change. And so I just want to give a big shout out and thank you to the people in the community still caring about the project, still tending the garden, even when no one's looking, and knowing that, a lot of people will probably never know who they are. So a project like this only works when you have hundreds, if not thousands of those people.
Yeah, I echo that. It keeps things going, gives most of us a job here, in one way or another. And as somebody that has contributed upstream, both kind of, I'll say BK before KEPS and then AK after KEPS, the contribution effort has definitely gone up. And it really does take a commitment that, while there are folks that, they are lucky from my perspective and have jobs as full-time contributors in open source projects like Kubernetes. A lot of folks that I've come across in my time, and I can speak for myself here, is like I've never had that role. And so I've just done it because I enjoyed the project. I enjoyed the community, and like I wanted to, make my mark and implement features that were near and dear to my heart and things like that. So, people that take that from start to finish, that have the diligence to see it through and whatnot, like definitely carry a sort of badge of honor in my eyes with that. So yeah, echo the thank you to the community there for sure.
What do we think? Got time for one more?
Yeah, we can do
Pick
one
one
more.
up. All right, let's pick one out from the Q&A from the people here. Let's see, Buddha asks, how do you cut through the noise of the hype and focus on getting things done? Especially if you are starting out or early in your journey, it feels like it's easy to get lost. I love
You know
that. I
what we
think
can
we've all
do is
felt that way.
we can probably combine it with the question from Thomas around, you know, thoughts on platform engineering, right?
Mhm.
Because this is one where there's a lot of noise. You know, if you were a system administrator like 20 years ago, you kind of understood what that meant. You know what I mean? If we're using AIX, I got to learn everything about AIX and be able to tend to that system where there's OS patches, rolling out software that runs on top, or helping debug and troubleshoot when those two things have a mismatch. And so then look, if you're a system administrator, just like what system are we talking about? Solaris, AIX, Linux? And then eventually we started to generalize. I'm a Unix administrator, right? We're burning Linux and AIX, and they got some stuff that's similar, but you need to kind of know system managers a little different than cobbling together a bunch of random ass scripts. And so there was a lot of value put on that expertise, but generalization started to set in. But those fundamentals are still important. And so then when we get to this world of like DevOps, where people are saying, hey, we're missing something culturally around collaboration, then you're trying to sit around like, what does this mean? Because everyone talks about it in a different way. Like one vendor saying they sell DevOps tools. One vendor is like DevOps is a culture. And then sometimes you're just seeing people that just use the label because it looks cool on LinkedIn. So you really try to cut through and it's like, what is the actual work? What actually needs to happen? So for me to cut through the noise, I want to see, what are we talking about? What are people doing now? And then what is this new thing that'll enable people to do what they couldn't do before? If you can't tell me those two things, then it's hard to really take you seriously. And I know I got to go look for somewhere else. So my thoughts on all of this stuff is anything that new comes out, more than likely is rooted in the past. Go figure out where the fundamentals overlap, deconstruct it from yourself, and anything you're still confused about, ask questions until you get your answers. That's it. That's how I cut through it all. I know there can't be something that new, because if it was that new, then no one would probably be even able to use it. And that's usually hard for stuff in our space, right? Stuff in our space tends to need to be a little bit compatible with the existing world if you want some adoption. So that's my kind of thoughts on it. So the platform engineering to me is just the word. I take that word and try to deconstruct what are people doing behind it. And then maybe there's some things I can take out of it and add to my skill set. And if you want to call that platform engineering, then cool.
All right. Thanks so much, Kelsey. And thanks everybody for chipping in with questions and anecdotes and everything in the chat and the Q&A there. This was our first fireside chat. We've done some roundtable stuff in the past, but fireside chat felt good to me. Let us know, you know, in whatever medium you want to, if you like this, if you'd like to see more things like this. Again, big thank you, Kelsey, for joining us and sharing with our community. I know there's a lot that I took away from this. I hope everybody else did as well. Again, thank you to our sponsors, Calendly, for helping us with the logistics stuff and making things with the Zoom and everything possible. Thanks everybody for coming out and enjoying this. If you have any topics that you would like to see for future meetups, feel free to reach out to us again through the Meetup, through Slack and Kubernetes org, Tech 404, on GitHub, however you want to reach out to us. Let us know if there's something you want to hear about or something you'd like to talk about, especially if you're local here to our Atlanta community. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and stop the recording in the normal piece of the meetup, but please hang around if you're able to. We'll convert everybody over to panelists, so you can turn on your cameras, you can turn on your microphones, and we can hang out and do some social hour there.
Thanks for coming, everybody.